Welcome to Tools for Time Traveling, the podcast equipping creators to build the future today. Because the future isn't something that just happens to you, it's built by creators of all stripes.
Every episode, we'll talk to a creative industry expert to get a behind the curtains look at the past and present of our creative industries, so you can gain that unfair advantage as you build out the future of your career. This season, we're focusing on music creators and providing strategic tools that help them navigate this often disrupted industry as they take control of their future.
All right, now let's jump into the episode. Yo, what's up, time travelers? Welcome back to Tools for Time Traveling, the podcast equipping creatives to build the future today. I'm Gavin Guidry, content creator, creative director, sometimes do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that, whatever it takes to get the job done.
And I'm Desmond Dickerson. I'm a work futurist, a strategist, a consultant, marketer some days as well.
Yeah. And if you've been tracking with us this far, you know that we've been talking to several guests to get a look at the future of creativity, more specifically, the future of music. So we've been chatting with these experts using some really great futurist frameworks and tools that Desmond has hipped us to really get like these great insights about where we are now, and then how we could potentially get to the artist-friendly, creator-friendly future that we want to see. So we've been learning so much from these guests, so much from these insights, that we actually just wanted to take a little pause. And before we jump into more interviews, just start to draw some connections and pull out insights from past guests. So you can sort of like get straight to that sweet insight, that killer insight that's going to give you that unfair advantage when it comes to you in the workplace or your creative output, whatever that may be. So today, when talking about a more creator-friendly future, we just want to highlight that a more creator-friendly future actually calls for more control in the hands of artists, specifically when we're speaking about music. And control starts with ownership.
Right. And when we talk about ownership, that's, of course, rights ownership or ownership of IP, ownership of catalogs, or, some people refer to as owning their masters, the master recording of the art that they've put out. And to learn more about this, throughout this episode, we're pulling in insights from two music industry veterans that we talked to. One was Demmette Guidry, Gavin's dad. He was, previously a senior VP at Columbia Records. So classic, albums and, artist rollouts that he worked on, from Mary to Nas to, Destiny's Child. He really, just had his hands.
Don't forget the Fugees.
Don't forget the Fugees. Oh, the Fugees. Had his hands all over the culture in the 90s in a good time. So we learned a ton from him about, kind of that executive perspective, that label perspective on owning rights to this stuff. And then we also talked to Wes Pendleton. He's a musician himself. He's a producer, but also a serial entrepreneur and a technologist. So we learned a little bit from him as well, from more of a, kind of outsider's view on the music industry of how best to monetize the art and creativity that you are putting out into the world.
Yeah, and I love the pairing of these two experts because, we talk a lot about how music needs disruption. Not just us. I think everybody talks about the music industry, how the music industry needs disruption.
The thing that really needs disruption, though, is these concerts, bro. Like, the getting a ticket these days is insane.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So we might delve into that on a future episode, but I just had to get it off my chest, man. Go ahead.
It's okay. You didn't get the Beyonce tickets. We get it. All right, bro.
Hey, I'm not saying that. Tickets are secure.
Oh, you got them?
Yeah,
you got them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We got the tickets, so we good on that.
All right, we did not.
Yikes.
But yeah, but again, of course, people were talking about disruption. What needs to be disrupted? Label structures need to be disrupted. They need to change. But the only way that we're really going to get there is maintaining ownership. That's what we learned really from these two really smart individuals. maintaining ownership can really help flip the paradigm. What this can really do for creators and musicians and artists is they can do the disrupting themselves if they're holding on to their ownership. So that's exactly what we talked to dear old dad about, Demmette Guidry, about, what would be disruptive is if these artists and these creators were maintaining their ownership.
Well, again, going back to the idea that it's all about rights management, right? I think if we held on, and I'm talking about we as a community, because I got to talk in, where I'm at, Gavin. I got to talk in community terms. I think if our creatives held on to their rights, they would bring the labels to their knees, because this rights management, maintain your ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Because you create it in your bedroom doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Because you are not proficient as a musician and you use some of the technologies like arcade or Fruit Loops or whatever, and you're just putting other people's works, you're sampling them and putting snippets together and doing whatever, it still has value.
I think this really represents like a mindset shift, right, for artists and creators. Just because we've talked about this ad nauseum, but the barrier to entry, the pay to play for being in the quote unquote music industry has become so much lower, right? It's so much easier because you in your house, in your basement, in your closet can make music. You can make this art form, and you could potentially reach millions of people through it. But that doesn't mean that it's not valuable, right? Just because you didn't rent out a studio for thousands of dollars, just because you didn't shoot a music video that again also costs thousands of dollars, or whatever.
Or, hey, you saying thousands, man? Them Hype Williams videos, that's in the millions, bro.
those back in the day used to definitely be in the millions for sure. But I think people need to still realize that there's still inherent value because you made it, because it's your intellectual property. It still has inherent value. So maintaining that ownership becomes really important when you look at it that way. It's not just like, oh, well, shoot, let me just like get the quick bag because now it's made and like I'm gonna flip it really quick, but understand really like what the value of that art, of that content is. And that can really start to help when we talk about flipping the label paradigm. You can start being on a similar level to these labels that you're going to work with, or forego a label completely if you have that ownership over your IP and your art.
Yeah. As he was saying, ownership is all about rights management. And it would really be revolutionary if artists, took that back, right? If somehow it became easier for artists to maintain their rights. Often they kind of trade off, some of those rights, some of those ownership rights to their art because they want a big upfront payoff. And hey, if you're coming from nothing, it makes sense. You want to live the lifestyle, you want to have the money. Maybe you just want a roof over your head or whatever that is. But yeah, it would be truly a revolutionary change to the music industry if artists were more incentivized, or maybe even labels were incentivized to make sure that these artists were maintaining their rights throughout the process, especially early in their career.
Yeah, especially early in their career, right? When it's like they don't know necessarily who they could be potentially. And so I think, a good example of what it could look like when someone, whether it be an artist or, a collection of artists, what it looks like when they actually hold on to their rights.
You guys may remember the Zune. Y'all remember that? That was a Microsoft. That was an attempt because we had a gentleman, he was over at Universal. He made an attempt for our entire industry because Universal has and always had, even back in the 90s, the biggest market share. So he went to a technology company and said he was the only company, Universal, having the biggest market share, the biggest catalogs, everything. He did not give any of his rights over to Steve Jobs. They came and made a deal with Sony. They came and made a deal with Warner, and I'm trying to think of his name. He's not in the industry anymore, but he was the chairman of Universal, and he decided, I'm going to hold out. And he went to Microsoft and said, I will exclusively give you all of our catalog and content. And he asked for a royalty from every Zune sold. That's what we should have done with Steve Jobs.
So he brought up the Zune. And first of all, shout out to my boy Brandon. We shouted him out before. He was such a fan of the Zune. Like, it was crazy. He loved the Zune so much. And little did we know back then, when I was clowning him, like, bro, like, just get an iPod. Little did we know that, like, that device had they, connected or resonated with more people like they did with him, could have completely altered how the music industry played out, especially over the past, 15 years or so. And just the way that, the leader at Universal Music Group was able to, take the power and the leverage that he had through that collective ownership of those music catalogs and say, hey, this device, this Zune music player, it would not exist. No one would even buy this device if it weren't for the music that's going to be added onto it later. So we feel like we have enough leverage to say, you know what? We want a piece of the action on the hardware too. We're not just selling the music, but this device that's dependent on the music, we want a piece of the action too. And it's a great example of what happens when you maintain your ownership and the power that you get from that. And, one could even look at, maybe some of these digital products like social networks or TikTok. Some of these social networks would not exist if not for music. People wouldn't be using them. They wouldn't be as popular. Posts wouldn't be going viral, and people wouldn't be engaging with them, which allows the companies to then, sell, ad revenue or ad space or whatever that ends up being. So I think it's just, it was a complete surprise to learn what the business model was for the music industry as relates to the Zune. And it's kind of a shocker that they haven't, tried to do similar things with other types of products that are leveraging them. And, I'm curious about what that means for the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think it means that ownership really opens up new avenues of distribution that are more equitable to the people who own the IP, right? So taking the Zune example, that would have not only helped the music industry and record labels, right? Because it's about rights management. It's the labels that own most of the rights and most of the masters. It could have helped them not suffer that deep decline that they suffered in 2007, 2008, 2009. But it would have also been more equitable for the artists themselves, right? Who were used to having much more money made from their actual music, their actual the actual like recorded art form of their music. So I think it just shows the avenues and the lanes that ownership opens up. You are able to decide who has access to your music and how much you're going to charge them. So, I think it would just be, it would be game changing to like somehow bring some of that lost promise back that the Zune could have given to labels and to musicians, and hold on to some of the rights and some of the IP that you own when you make something, so that you can go straight to the consumer. That would really be game changing for artists, because again, it lets you set the price. It lets you set the engagement for how people are going to consume your content.
Yeah. And so we look back in recent history and we see that, example with the Zune, and see what could have been. And then fast forward to today and some of the emerging trends we're starting to see. It's really interesting to see, like, people, instead of embracing that lesson, they're doing the opposite. People are forfeiting some of their ownership rights, as we're seeing more and more artists are just like selling off their catalogs to different holding groups. At this point, it's been a lot of legacy artists. You're seeing like a Bob Dylan or Sting or even like Dr. Dre, right? But I think Justin Bieber recently sold off his catalog,
Justin
or at least
Bieber.
a portion of it, and some other younger artists are embracing that too, which is a little confusing, a little interesting. So we chatted with Wes Pendleton to get his take on this and start to understand this concept a little better.
So another thing, if you guys have been paying attention, all these artists are selling their catalogs. And so the first couple times it's like, wow, man, listen, if somebody's offering me $500 million, Bruce Springsteen got $500 million for his catalog. You got to sell the catalog, fam. As an artist, to make $500 million is almost impossible. Just off of your music alone, it's like basically impossible, unless you're Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? So I was like, wow, these people get to get liquid, like basically like the next day, which is really hard to do. But then I started wondering, like, but like everybody's selling their catalog, and I thought that was odd, because if I'm on the outside looking in, I'm like, guys, if these guys are paying billions of dollars for your catalog, maybe you should keep your catalog, because they are obviously seeing something that's making them understand how lucrative this is. And I taught a class one time specifically about why music is so sticky. And this is to go to Gavin's point. I said, one of the most amazing thing, and this actually even goes to the futurist side of things about songwriting, right? Owning your publishing, owning your writing, owning the production. When you watch commercials now, 9 times out of 10, you're hearing a very classic song that is not the original song. It's a classic song that's been redone. Trust me when I tell you, the original artist still gets paid for that in the same way they would if they used the original. But the thing is, the reason why you're hearing it that way on the commercial is because these major companies, they've bought these catalogs, and because they have so much catalog, they know that they don't need to, if I have to go directly to Mary J. Blige to get rights to her song and she's charging me $100,000, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy her catalog, and then I'm going to sell her that same song for as much as I want to sell it. And if a company says $100,000 is too much, can you do a different version for $50,000? I'm going to go find somebody that'll do that version for like $5,000 to $10,000 and making them redoing it. And then I still own the masters of that version as well, and can be used over and over and over. It's the most amazing thing. And Gavin is just so dead on when he talks about the utility of music. It's insane how you can parse it so many different ways for so many different usages.
Yeah, I mean, that's just some great insight from someone who does straddle the fence between, musician, he's a producer, and someone that's in the venture capital space. And so it's so surprising just to see this trend of people selling their catalogs. And so, one of the more recent examples, recent as of today, who knows when people will be listening to this, but, QC, Coach K and P, right here in Atlanta, just cashed out, all of QC's catalogs, to Scooter Braun, basically. And I think a lot of people are applauding them, and we're not in the music industry. So I'm not going to say that wasn't the right thing to do. I think, $300 million for their catalogs, that's an incredible, life-changing amount of money for everybody involved. Yeah. So I think it's a great move, but I think that, what we notice in talking to Wes is that there's the potential that music catalogs might be worth more than like today's money can buy. Mm-hmm. Because, there's some, we see that with the QC example, because, there's some speculation that the reason and the people who are behind, I think it's called Hybe, that purchased these catalogs, it has something to do with the metaverse. So, let's say that, we make $300 million today, but we we don't really know the potential of the metaverse, and how lucrative that could potentially be. So if in the future we can create Migos in the metaverse, and we can create city girls, and we could create a little baby in the metaverse, and do QC festivals, and make three tenfold what it was sold for, then I think we could potentially be reevaluating how good of an idea that was. So I think one thing, before we just like move on and completely like, because I don't want to make it seem like we're like poo-pooing the idea of selling your catalogs, because I think one thing that's really interesting when we're seeing contemporary artists do this, like QC's artists, they are contemporary artists, they're still making music, is that they do still have the potential to make more IP. They still have the potential to do more creating. So, but I think this just shows that catalog ownership could be the key to musicians branching into other industries and leveraging other communities. So if you want to get into gaming, if you want to get into tech, if you want to get into media, we talk about creating creator ecosystems around yourself. If you want to have a full like media empire around your IP, you can only do that if you own the IP.
Yeah. And, just going further on what you were saying, like, hey, what if they're all buying up this music to, create experiences in the metaverse? Like, that's just one media outlet, right? If you think about, like, how successful movies are when they're, like, based off of a musical artist. Like, we just, Oscars just passed. Yeah, we had, like, Elvis was, like, they didn't win anything, but they were nominated for a lot. Very successful movie.
They did not win anything.
Nothing at all, bro.
Nothing.
But a couple of years ago, it was the movie about Queen, I think. Yeah. These are popular movies. There's tons of money to be made off of that. And when you own the music catalog, like you can use that music any which way you want to in there. Yeah. Or, maybe it's getting used in video games and all these other things. I think that there's, as Wes was hinting at, as you got at, like there's something to be considered there if all of the money folks are like, let's buy up this all at one time. It seems like there's a reason that maybe we may be unaware of. And as you said, it's not all bad. If you are 70 years old, 80 years old, and you've made quite the living off of your music, and you may not make any more music, but you can get $500 million like right here and now. That's tremendous to pass that on to your family or whoever else in times after that, because your money or your music may not generate that much for your children or even grandchildren.
So maybe like it's not about like, maybe it's not so black and white, right? Maybe it's not just like sell or not sell. Yeah. Maybe, it would be game changing to consider other kinds of ways to make money off of the catalogs and the IP. Absolutely. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because something that comes to mind for me is like, okay, if it's not a sell or no sell situation, maybe it's just a joint venture, right? Maybe you say, hey, I'm going to sell 50% of my music catalog. You're a younger artist, maybe someone like, we'll say Future, right? Future is still like, and technically in his prime, he's still going to make probably a lot more music, but already has a really strong catalog. What's the joke? What toxic company is going to join venture with Future?
Listen, all these private equity financial institutions are toxic. Man. What you talking about? That's their theme song.
You are very right. That's like it's a toxic masculinity power up.
That's a match made in heaven, bro.
Avengers a symbol. Avengers of toxicity is a symbol.
Let's say an artist like Future, or Drake or whoever else, and they say, hey, we're gonna do a joint venture. Instead of me selling my whole catalog to you, 50% goes to this private equity firm or this, rights holding company or, the startup that, manages music catalogs, right? So with that, the artists, they're now, perhaps they're a general partner at a venture capital firm or private equity firm, so they get the immediate cash out of the value of 50% of their catalog, but then they're also tightly connected to this company that has their hands in many other industries, and they're able to learn from these business professionals who've risen to the top of their careers and their industries, leveraging business strategy, and they can learn those lessons from them. And on the flip side, the folks that are at the firm, first of all, they're getting the connections, they're getting the cultural cachet from this artist that they're working with, but also they're able to leverage this catalog and make money immediately off of that as well. So it does seem like it could be a good opportunity for some sort of creative partnerships in that area.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, again, we talk about getting outside of music, expanding your identity outside of being just a musician, because that's how companies are bought and sold every day. You sell your company, and now and maybe not completely, again, maybe it's a joint venture, and now you are a key contributor, you're a president, you're maybe even a CEO of that larger corporation. So as a musician, as a creator, how can we position ourselves to operate in a similar manner? And I also wonder, like, could we take what some of these holding companies, these maybe private equity firms, or like whoever these firms are that are buying up all of these catalogs, and maybe like change the perspective on who it is that we're selling to. Maybe we're instead selling to platforms that actually allow for other content utilization in the future. Again, we talk about music having an extremely high index of content utility. So I think there's a lot of other kinds of companies that could exploit your music in the future, whether it be an Epic Games or someone that we see sort of like leading the charge when it comes to Web3 and the new internet. I think we can just start to look differently. So like, not necessarily people who just want all of your rights, but people who are going to take your music and turn it into something completely different for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to wrap up here, as we said at the top, a creator-friendly future, it calls for more control in the hands of artists. And that control starts with ownership of your creative output, ownership of your IP, ownership in a way that is going to make you more flexible and autonomous in the way that people engage with and consume, and the price that they pay for your content.
Yeah. What it comes down to is ownership is all about rights. The right to leverage your art, your IP in any way you see fit. And based off of this conversation, based off of these insights, we feel like it would be paradigm shifting if we started to see new incentives emerge for artists to retain their ownership rights, especially early on in their career. And maybe that calls for new laws that are created to protect creatives. We also, heard about the Zune, and although it was short-lived, it gave us a lasting example of what rights ownership can buy, right? It allows you to set the rules of exactly how the world engages with your IP. And, hopefully we see folks start to embrace that lesson, right? And start to learn, hey, it will be game-changing if me as an artist, or this collective of artists, if we start to use our ownership of our art, ownership of our music as leverage to get a cut of these products and services that are thriving on top of that art that we've created and put out into the world, and that's connected with audiences, in digital platforms and in real life. And, but kind of the counter to that, we're seeing a little bit of the opposite. We're seeing an emerging trends of artists start to sell their catalogs to, private equity firms or some of these startups that are emerging to manage music catalogs. And, again, for some, this is a logical business move. They've already made a ton of money, and they're not making any new music, or maybe the best days of their revenue generating is behind them, right? So for them, it might make sense. But for these younger artists or these contemporary artists, it could be truly revolutionary if they started to, not just decide if they're going to sell or not sell their catalogs, but create new and innovative partnerships with some of these firms, right? And that way they can better learn how to maneuver in the business arena while their financial partners start to benefit from the monetization of those catalogs, but also like the cultural cachet that comes with the association of you know, a music artist that's in their prime. So, you know, again, the ownership is the key to the future of music. And we see a lot of different ways that this can play out over the years to come. And, you know, hopefully the folks that are listening into this are starting to internalize that and think about what the future of your music, what the future of your, you know, rights catalog might bring you.
Exactly. So, you know, like Desmond said, these are hopefully the canvas, the kickstart, the fuel for you to go and like take these prompts and these insights and these opportunities that we're sort of uncovering here on this podcast and go think about the answers and solutions of what it can take. That thinking and potentially, you know, that prototyping, right, as we go along can be the driver of what gets us from the present to the near future. Yeah, so if you do have any ideas of, hey, how, like, what the future of ownership and IP ownership looks like for creatives, we'd love to hear that. Please scroll down. If you're on Spotify, we have different ways that you can interact with us and let us know. If you're on YouTube, of course, you could just leave a comment. And then overall, please just like, follow, and subscribe with what we're doing. We've got more insights, we've got more episodes coming out. We definitely want you guys to stay involved with that as we gear up to create the future that we want to see. All right, see y'all next time.
Take care.